welcome back to Hammerheads, the podcast that looks at every great Hammer horror film from the years 1957 to the year 1974, and that's according to the BFI's Best Hammer Horror list. And I'm here every time with my good friend Miles Watts. Hello, Miles.
Hello, Marcus Wilson.
Howdy.
Howdy.
And we will be dissecting each of these gems of horror over the next few months, and we've completed quite a few already, but they've been mainly quite gothic, macabre genre pieces, haven't they?
Yeah, I'm glad
monsters.
Monster ones. I'm glad they picked some of the classics. Obviously, they had Dracula and Curse of the Werewolf and stuff. So they've sort of gone through what you might have called the Universal Monsters list, really, haven't they? Yeah. But as we've gone on, and I think this is partly because of the studio's evolving, but also the BFI has obviously chosen some interesting ones instead of just all the Dracula ones and so on, that we're getting more and more diverse with our film styles now.
We are, and we're well into the 60s, which means all kinds of psychedelic nonsense.
Psychedelic nonsense.
So we're up to 1965, and this week we will be looking at the film Fanatic, or Die Die, My Darling, by its American name.
Which, of course, is German for thee, my darling.
And Die Bart Die.
No one who speaks German could be an evil man.
So, yes, despite the horrendous US name of the film, it is a very interesting departure from what we've seen before, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's an Italian director called Silvio Narizzano or Narizzano. I don't know how you pronounce it, but I love the fact that at this point there's a kind of crossover with Italian horror directors of the 60s and 70s, because that's something that's it's a totally different track to go down, isn't it? But suddenly Hammer are working with them, which is great.
Well, I thought that, like, seeing the Italian name, I thought, oh, they're kind of going down the Giallo route, and they've kind of got some kind of Italian horror filmmaker. And actually, this director has just directed. He seems to have just been directing UK kitchen sink dramas for TV before this. It's like not as though he's got a history in the horror genre. And this is his first feature.
That's true, but there are visual Giallo elements in it, which we'll discuss later. They pop up, they do. But yeah, I'd not really known of this director. I was looking at his IMDb. I was thinking, okay, Georgie Girl, right? Okay, I know that one. I know the song anyway. And he's done some interesting, sort of TV and lots of British stuff. It's sort of very eclectic. And then suddenly in the middle is this Hammer film. So you sort of look at, he's done a lot of TV series, and suddenly he's getting, I wonder why he got the offer to do this. Do you know how Hammer came across Silvio Narizzano?
I've not found anything about that.
No.
Actually, I was going to say that this movie, compared to all the others we've watched so far, which are kind of quite stuffy and monster genre and kind of Victorian and stuff like this feels a lot more kind of laid back and kind of like more kind of jazz freestyle, the way that they've kind of put the film together, and the acting is obviously, but partly of that is because of the American actors, I think, as well.
Yeah.
But in that spirit, I've not done any research or written any notes. So
do you know what? I tried to do a little bit of research. I couldn't find much on at least why they'd worked with Silvio Narizzano. And so I came up short that way. But I was looking at the cinematographer, who's Arthur Ibbotson, and he's done some fantastic stuff, which is what I thought. I mean, we can get straight into it. I thought this film looked absolutely fantastic. I think it's Eastman color, but the stock was just beautiful. It's just this really, really nice print. The colors are gorgeous.
It kind of gets more and more garish the more nightmarish you get into the film.
It does,
lots of these kind of neon colors coming in, which actually reminded me quite a lot of like Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who I guess started making movies around this time. But some of his, obviously a great film director who works a lot with a lot of strong female leads, which this film is also fantastic for.
I thought Stephanie Powers was absolutely fantastic in this film, but she reminded me very much of one of those Final Girl movies, sort of, a Jamie Lee Curtis or one of those great slasher movies. And because we're in the mid-60s now, there's so many comparisons now
Yeah.
that you could say, well, what was happening at the same time? Films like Repulsion, which is one of my favorites, and
Yeah.
that brilliant performance by Catherine Deneuve. And this reminded me of a sort of hybrid of that kind of thing with a horror film. And yeah, it doesn't have monsters in it. The closest to a monster is some of the supporting henchmen
Yes,
who
we'll come on
will
to
go into those.
that.
Yeah, but I'm just looking at this Arthur Ibbotson as a DOP. I'm looking at his CV, and it's absolutely spectacular. I mean, he's got some great films, but 1970, The Railway Children. I mean, come
Oh,
on,
wow.
that is, I watched that again recently, and it is a lovely film, beautifully shot. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Arthur Ibbotson shot as well.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, in '71. And then kind of going forward, he did It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet, which I think is the
Yeah.
best James Herriot film. Prisoner of Zenda, Where Eagles Dare. I mean, this guy, The Bounty, Santa Claus the movie, he had a very good career, Arthur Ibbotson. So I was really struck by lots of elements of this film, actually. But what got me straight away and all the way through was the cinematography.
So maybe a pairing of a more experienced cinematographer with a first-time feature director.
Yeah, imagine getting someone like Arthur Ibbotson as a first-time feature director, and you go, "Oh well." I mean, and by that point, he hadn't directed the photography on The Railway Children. So he went on to do
Yeah.
that, but still, what a guy! I mean, just an amazing eye for composition, camera movement, color, everything. It's all really good. So it is one of, to date, in our viewing, one of Hammer's best looking films, I think.
It does look, I mean, it feels like a breath of fresh air, this film, because you've come out of that sort of Victorian stuffiness, and um,
Mm.
the Stephanie Power's character Patricia is obviously a very feisty lady. You have
Mm.
a very feisty lady in the lead role in Tallulah Bankhead.
Oh, she's phenomenal in this, isn't she?
And Hammer's sort of getting on that bandwagon that I guess was kicked off by Psycho in 1960, where you've got
Mm.
these more psychodramas played out in horror now. You don't need a monster, the monster is the kind of guy next door who looks after his mum or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and in fact, the ending reminded me of Psycho. There's the bit where, I won't blow everything at the beginning, but there's a scene towards the end where a character is grabbing another character who's holding a knife, and it just reminded me of the end of Psycho,
yeah,
where Vera Miles is holding Norma Bates with the knife, and
yeah,
I thought, wow, that's almost like a shot-for-shot recreation of that scene. It must have
yeah.
been conscious.
So you've got that kind of influence, but then you've
Mm,
also got this a number of films that preceded this with those very strong female
mm.
sort of aging Hollywood actresses type thing. So whether it's All About Eve or Sunset Boulevard, and then through to um, things like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane with
Yeah, that's a
Betty
couple of years
Davis,
later, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah.
and
It did
yeah, I think
remind
it's a
me of
bit
Baby
early.
Jane.
Baby Jane's a couple of years earlier,
Oh,
I
was it a
think.
couple of years earlier? I thought it was like 67, Baby Jane, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, you could be right. Let me check that.
It's around the same time.
62. Yeah, it's 62.
Oh, okay, okay.
So there
That's
was this
earlier than I thought.
clamoring for these sort of great Hollywood actresses
Yeah,
to come in and do these slightly kind of hammy and grotesque roles. And I know Tallulah Bankhead always saw herself in competition with Betty Davis. So maybe this
yes,
was one of the reasons she decided to take this on after seeing Baby Jane. And in fact,
yes.
Betty Davis plays in a Hammer film the same year. She's
Oh,
starring
yes.
in The Nanny in
The
1965 as well.
Nanny, that's right. Yeah. See, that's the thing. This list is not sort of meant to be definitive. They've picked 17 of their what they think are good choices. They're not like every single
Yeah,
Hammer film.
because if they hadn't picked Fanatic for 1965, I assume they would have picked The Nanny.
Well, exactly. So, but I'm glad I've seen The Nanny, and not everyone's seen The Nanny, but I would rewatch that anyway because it's Betty Davis. But I'm glad they picked Fanatic for the 65 choice, because it felt like, actually, what it reminded me of was films like, is it Jorge Grau? Spanish director. He directed Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue.
Yeah.
Except that was really horrendous. And also, there's a British filmmaker whose name I'm actually going to forget, so I'm going to have to look it up now. I was looking it up earlier. Oh, Pete Walker was a British film director who did lots of sort of shocking films in the 60s and 70s. He did Schizo, he did Frightmare, House of Whipcord.
Oh yeah.
He did. And in fact, it reminded me of House of Whipcord, Tallulah Bankhead's performance, because that's sort of got slightly demented old lady in it, and it all takes place sort of in a house.
Yeah.
That's the thing about this film. It wasn't monsters chasing someone around. It was a dreadful sort of bevy of hideous people who are just full of bitterness and revenge, or in the case of the two henchmen, don't know any better. So really, should we go into the plot as well? Because the plot is quite good. Oh, in
Yeah.
fact, the plot, and now the writer is Richard Matheson, who is a
Yes.
great writer. He wrote everything from Jewel, Spielberg's Jewel, to I Am Legend, Incredible Shrinking Man. I mean, he was just one of the great writers of them days. And
Yeah.
I didn't know until last time we met that Richard Matheson had written this one.
Yeah, so we'll go into Richard Matheson in a bit because
Yeah,
I'm not so aware of all of his work. So,
right.
um, so the plot basically it's one of the first that the first that we've reviewed,
Mm,
where we're set in modern day. We kind of feel like we're set in 1965, and there's this
mm,
American woman, Patricia, who's coming to London to marry her lover, Alan Glenn Tower, and she feels that she owes it to her previous partner who died in a car crash to visit his mother, her previous partner's mother, Mrs.
mm.
Trefoil,
Big
to
mistake.
to introduce herself, basically to just put ghosts to rest.
Mm.
And soon she's taken prisoner in Mrs. Trefoil's mansion in the middle of the mansion itself. Actually feels like you're transported back, back to the Victorian era almost. It's like this bubble in
Yeah.
1965. You kind of feel as though you're back in the Victorian era almost once you go in there. But the
Mm.
whole thing is, I mean, after watching all of our monster movies with their sort of getting fake blood in all of the, it just looked like paint and stuff like that.
Yes,
Suddenly, this feels really, really sinister and frightening. It
it does.
feels, yeah, really as though they've turned up the horror to 11.
It's violent.
It is
It's
violent,
I would go I was go as far.
menacing.
Yeah, like this is the kind of film my granddad would have said is violent. You know, whenever he meant
Mm,
violent, he meant slightly too realistic. Um, and yeah, it's got this real horrible sense of a woman being tortured and completely browbeaten and just destroyed, and all she wants to do is get away. There comes a point where she's, all the civilities stop and they stop talking about her ex-fiance who died, and it's just, I want to get out.
yeah,
And they imprison her, and she then has to go through various horrible various escape attempts, including a spectacularly badly timed one where she lowers herself out the window right as they're looking out the window, and they just grab her and pull her back in, and she's like, phooey.
and then she like falls through glass ceilings. She
Yeah,
gets stabbed in the shoulder with a
yeah,
knife. That was really quite shocking to me after
yeah,
having seen the previous 7 years of Hammer horror. It's like I didn't expect that.
yeah. And I wonder, making a big deal out of the director being Italian, I wonder if I was thinking a little bit of Argento and Suspiria and things like, because
Mm,
Suspiria, while Suspiria is way more out there than this film,
mm,
and way more violent and way more scary and way more abstract and colorful, and anyway, it's a totally different kind of film. It did remind me of that, and yeah, with the stabbings and the sort of, there's a sense of real nastiness in this film. There's a sense that people are actually getting hurt and
yes.
wet and cold and beaten up and traumatized, and that is great for the story, because you spend the whole thing thinking, why doesn't she try and get away? Oh, she has. Oh, right, okay, she got caught. Yeah. you know
And I say that this mansion that she gets imprisoned in seems Victorian, but actually it's more sort of Southern Gothic almost, because you've got these
yeah,
two American kind of leading ladies dueling it out in there.
yes, almost reminded me of Grey Gardens. Great documentary.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean, with this crumbling old mansion? And that actually
totally.
also, that's what was the most Hammer about it, apart from, yeah, we'll go into the henchman, but that when you saw that shot of the crumbling mansion, I was like, wow, this reminds me of, this would be, I mean, obviously the interiors were done on a set, but it was less obvious this time than it usually is. They've sort of, obviously they've extended their reach in terms of, this is the Bray Studios set,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of exteriors. starts with an exterior driving, which is very nicely done. And again, I think it's partly down to the skill of Arthur Ibbotson, who's obviously a very inventive DOP. But yeah, that house reminded me of it in the late 50s, early 60s. That house might have been a huge, great set built as a backdrop or a painting by Bray Studios, but actually, as far as I know, it's a real house they found and that was falling down.
It feels like we're less on the Bray Studio set this time.
It does. It feels
we're on location.
Much more realistic in terms of, they were obviously inspired by the time, because I think, even Hitchcock became aware at various points of how fake some of his sets looked. And he went for a little bit more realism as he went on in things like Frenzy and stuff. They're a bit nastier.
Yeah.
Even Hitchcock evolved his style to be a bit nastier and a bit less studio bound. And I think that's what Hammer seemed to be doing with this one.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, Tallulah Bankhead's previous feature to this, she'd sort of given up, almost retired from film acting. It was Lifeboat by Alfred Hitchcock.
Yes, I heard an amusing story today from my friend Ben Bentley, who's a photographer. He lives out in LA now, and he's a big fan of Batman, the 66 series. He's sort of one of the leading voices he's got his own Batblog 66, I think it's called. And I said, oh, look, I'm watching a film. Every time I'm watching a film with a Batman. Well, have you ever heard of the television series Batman? That's Greg McHugh, isn't it? I'm quoting that. Yeah, what show is that?
Oh, what's it called? Gary Tank Commander.
Gary Tank Commander. If you haven't seen that, watch it. It's so funny. Marcus put an episode on for me when I was up in school. Are you familiar with the Batman? That's what he says, isn't it? Tallulah Bankhead played a character in the 60s Batman show called Black Widow. So every time I'm watching something with a Batman alumni, I have to say, hey, Ben, I'm watching this. And he goes, funny story about Tallulah Bankhead. He knows all these Hollywood histories. When she did Lifeboat, apparently, she's a cheeky tinker, because when she had to do the scenes going up and down ladders, she went commando. So she knew she'd be winking at her co-stars. What a brilliantly terrible person. But yeah, that was the story he came up with for Tallulah Bankhead. Made me love her even more, I have to say. Yeah. So yeah, she's terrific in this film. She did remind me of, Norma Bates, the voice of Norma Bates, or
that reminds me. I did see a YouTube clip of Blake Carrington. What's the actor called? John Forsyth.
John Forsyth, yeah.
Actually telling that story and doing a really good Alfred Hitchcock impression. In fact.
You sent me that, didn't you? It is phenomenal. If you just type in John Forsyth, Alfred Hitchcock, and he goes into good evening. And you wouldn't think John Forsyth could do it, but he's a very versatile actor. So yeah, he nails it, doesn't it?
Yeah. So should we go on and talk about the henchmen and women before we come back to the two leading ladies?
Oh boy. So the henchmen, two very famous actors, one British, one American. Want to go ahead and name them?
Well, Donald Sutherland in a career-defining role, I felt.
I love the first shot of him. He's like, he basically plays this great, enormous lug who it could be straight out of a Romero movie, because they give him this sort of silvery, fishy makeup that makes him look like, Lurch or something. And obviously Donald Sutherland's like a phenomenal actor and a very intelligent guy, but they make him play this guy who basically might as well be called, Mongo or something. And he just spends the whole thing going, what me do? What me do with man? What me do with woman? You want me kill? And he's gardening most of the time. And he looks like a sort of the kind of role Bernard Bresslaw would get in Carry On Screaming or something.
He's kind of a Frankenstein type character, isn't he? He's made up to look a bit like that.
Yeah, and his job is just basically as a heavy, and he has to sort of push Stephanie Powers around and kick down doors, and as does the other henchman, which is
Peter Vaughan, a British actor, probably best known in the UK at least for his role as Grouty in the comedy series Porridge.
Yeah, he was in Porridge, and he was in things like Remains of the Day, and so he plays the elderly father of Anthony Hopkins, and he just ended up playing very avuncular English men, didn't he? He only died 10 or so years ago. He was maybe in his 90s, but anyway, he was very enduring. And I think if you look at his IMDb, he was in so much stuff. So yeah, to see him as a very sort of scary. There's a bit where Stephanie Powers wants to escape, and she looks out the window and she sees him. He's just parked the car and hidden it in the garage. She looks out the window and he clocks her, and he starts jiggling the keys as if to say, well, I can do something for you if you can do something for me. And then it's just this, he's got these really a great ability. He's got a lovely face, but he's got this ability in this film to be really horrible looking.
And it's quite a sort of sexual menace as well, which, you know, you kind of see it kind of more in Victorian terms in the more early Hammer monster movies, but this is a lot more explicit in defining and describing what's happening there.
Yeah, like we've seen between us, we've seen so many films that you would class as disturbing, violent, sinister, you know, really dark. And this isn't really in that. It sort of skirts around that that kind of tone, but it's got a lot going for it in that regard. I think it's like it does sort of belong in the pantheon of. It's, you know what, there's lots of films that came out in the 60s, and Repulsion is one of them in 65, where it kind of bridged the gap between these psychological horrors and these slasher movies. So I think you know, if I was really going to big Fanatic up, I would say it kind of belongs in that little Venn diagram of pre-slasher movies, you know, psychological horrors pre-slasher movies, because it does have that vibe. It's just that the villain in this one, it takes place in one house, but the villain in this one is Tallulah Bankhead, who's this sort of Miss Havisham type character, isn't she? She's like this, you were no good for my son, and I'm going to make you suffer. And so it's,
I mean, she's I mean, the name of the film, we should say, comes from her being a religious fanatic and indoctrinating her staff and the Patricia character in I mean, almost like trying to save her soul for her dead departed son. That's how it kind of starts out.
And then that awful, like that portrait she has up of him on the wall, and she kind of worships it really. And it's scary. It's like this guy looks like he was like awful. When you see at the end, he's got this scary face with these beady eyes poking out, and you're like, that's who she was married to.
And you kind of have to think, well, he was her son, so he must have kind of, some of that craziness must have rubbed off on him as well. So.
I think, he looks crazy, doesn't it? It's like you don't know what happened, do you? You don't know how died in a car crash, but you don't quite know. It's like maybe something sinister happened, and that's why. Did you also notice that we haven't mentioned Eutha Joyce, who plays Anna?
I mean, I was going to say, because you've got the sort of Peter Vaughan sort of being this sort of the sexual predator, almost menace in this film, but he's married to Anna, who is played by Eutha Joyce, who's probably best known again in the UK for Man About the House and George and Mildred. You know,
she's Mildred in George and Mildred. Yeah,
70s comedies. But she is actually, in a way, more of a direct threat to Patricia, in that she seems hugely violent, and she will do whatever she is asked to by Tallulah Bankhead's character.
And she's less frail, isn't she? So she looks like she can actually thump someone and probably wring their neck, like the two henchmen.
And she probably fights with Patricia in this, and this results in Patricia being stabbed like almost in the neck by this knife.
I know, yeah. I mean, it's almost like a Bond movie. It's like Rosa Klebb, isn't it? She could be a really good Bond henchwoman.
So you have these like really strong, powerful female characters, and actually the male characters are a bit kind of more
effete, maybe.
Well, kind of. They're just a bit kind of lesser characters, I think, in this. Although
they're sort of they're kind of non-events as characters. What's the word? I'm trying to think of a word that's
they're quite two-dimensional, aren't they?
Yeah, and there's a specific word I'm trying to think of. Ineffectual, I think, is the word. Where they're there, but you know, the story seems to be, well, there was a dead ex-fiance, he's gone. There's the new fiance. I mean, he basically turns up, tries to rescue her. In the end, you don't really need his help. He just comes to pick her up. And that's at the end when she says,
all the male characters are pretty ineffectual, aren't they?
She's so traumatized at the end. She goes, "Don't shout at me," and he goes, "Hey, shut up! We're getting you out of here." It's like, oh,
it's good, and I love that it's quite bizarrely kind of quite a sort of almost a feminist piece that Hammer's doing.
It is actually. You could sort of remake this, and it would be not that out of place if you didn't change much, because it is very, very dominated by the women.
That said, Peter Vaughan's character, Peter Vaughan's character Harry, nearly does take Stephanie Powers' head off in a speedboat on the
God, I
water.
know when she goes in the water. Yeah.
That looks like a proper stunt as well. I don't think that was a double.
No, it looked nasty, didn't it?
Okay, should we chat about the two female leads then?
Yes, as this is, as we've said, a very female-centric movie. In fact, the men in it of note, other than the fiance who turns up here and there, are just thugs with no
Yeah,
brains.
totally.
Yeah.
But Tallulah Bankhead looks incredible in this. Some of the
Yeah.
makeup, just she's almost got this mask painted onto her face, which is just terrifying.
Yeah, and this was her last movie, wasn't it? So she's a
Yeah, yeah. She came out of retirement for this, and then this was her last. And it's interesting towards the end of the film that you know that all of the mirrors have been removed from upstairs in the mansion, but then the Stephanie Powers character gets down into the basement, and she actually sees the dead Harry, doesn't she? The Peter
yeah.
Vaughan character.
Yes, in the and he's gone all horrible and gangrenous, and he's got holes in his skin, and yeah.
And he's obviously supposed to be dead, but it doesn't stop him from blinking on film.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
He wasn't very dead, was he?
He wasn't very dead. No.
I had to think, is he like dying? Is he like rotting down
He's
there?
decomposing,
Like, no,
but blinking still. So
he's still going. Yeah.
you'd have thought they could have retaken that. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's such is the beauty of the transfer that you get to see it in glorious technicolor detail with
see his eyes. Mind you, it's quite. I mean, there's a famous, in Psycho, the last shot of the shower sequence. That involves Janet Leigh is that amazing shot where the camera turns around sort of 180 and then pulls out, and you can actually see her slightly move her, and then she swallows as well. But it's like, yeah, but she's just been killed, so that might be,
yeah,
Peter Vaughan's character. Death. I don't think Peter Vaughan had just been killed, but he was dying very slowly, if that's the case. But that was quite shocking. That's quite classic Hammer, isn't it, to see a monstrous figure.
It is, and there's also down in the basement. There seems to be lots of sort of the mirrors are down there. There's almost like a makeup mirror and lots of fancy clothes, which kind of leads you to suspect that the Tallulah Bankhead character maybe has had a bit more of a life as a younger woman, and that they didn't unless I blinked and missed it. They didn't really take that any further.
I got the sense that she was a bit ashamed of something, and I actually felt sorry for her at the end. I don't know if you did as well. When I saw her crying over us, she'd cut herself and she was crying to her son's portrait and just going. Yeah, I did actually feel a little bit. Oh, she lost it. She clearly lost it when her son died. But whether she was always like that, I don't know.
She sort of loses her power towards the end of the film, and it sort of drains away, and you can see that she knows that that's happening. And I mean, she's got issues coming from all sides, because there's Patricia who's trying to escape. There's her henchmen who are sort of turning against her, and she is a bit of a sort of sad character towards the end.
Yeah, and that's a sort of testament to her performances, that you think, wow, what a crazy psycho for the whole movie, and then at the end you still oh well, she was just a sad old woman. Even though she's tortured Stephanie Powers for 2 hours. And Stephanie Powers, I think, is really great in this film. Like, she plays this sort of happy-go-lucky 60s girl with, she's happy, she's got everything to live for, and then she stumbles into this just grotesque, ghoulish mansion, and she basically
she gives as good as she gets all the way through.
She fights her way out. She's not pathetic. She fights to get out. She tries to con her way out. She tries to beat her way out. She has that unfortunate incident with the lowering herself out the window straight into Peter Vaughan's arms. But she's terrific in it, and you do start believing that will get out of here any way she can.
And this is a bit of a departure again from the early Hammer horror films, where the sort of the female characters tend to be a bit more kind of waif-like and not quite as feisty.
Or she would have got in a previous Hammer movie. She might have got saved by the man. She might have been, but at the end, the guy kind of swoops in. He just happens to have the car that takes her away at the end. But she gets out of there herself, and she fights her way out. And she is a final girl. I've never really liked that. It's a little bit of a reductive term, final girl, but everyone knows what it means. It just means the woman who escapes all the bad guys in a horror movie. And also, you know, there is a kind of reference to that because, you know, Tallulah Bankhead says, "Are you a virgin?"
Yeah.
Because she wants to know, "Are you a virgin?" Because, you know, you were going to be marrying my son. And then as she shuts the door, Stephanie Powers just goes to herself, "Am I a virgin?" You know what I mean? Which is
Yeah.
great. It's just like, okay, so clearly she's not a virgin, and but there is a discussion about it because, you know, the classic thing with the final girl is that they're supposed to be a virgin, and then that's how they survive the movie. But she's a little bit more feisty than that. She's like, "No, I'm a '60s woman," and
She's a modern lady, and
she's a modern lady.
she's
Yeah.
getting engaged to this man who seems to be some kind of in the film industry.
Hmm. Yeah, so it had lots of nice elements of it. So I thought there was just enough of a character for Patricia without overburdening her with loads and loads of backstory and
Yeah.
you know, motivation and stuff. Really, her motivation is just to get the hell out of there. She's doing the decent thing. Well, I should, you know, I was engaged to this woman's son, so I just wanted to drop in on her, and it's like, maybe I shouldn't have done that, yes. But she does do it. So she's a decent person. She actually reminded me of my mum because she looks a bit like my mum did in the 60s.
Right.
My mum was about 20 and 65, so
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
age. And she had the same hair, the same look. She had the Mary Quant
Wow.
skirts and boots. And at one point, Patricia comes down into the living room in a sort of Velma from Scooby-Doo outfit. And Tallulah Bankhead goes, "That's the devil's color."
Yeah, that's right.
Red is the devil's color. And she's like, "Oh my God." So it is as well, it's a kind of rejection of the puritanical 50s and going, "No, we're in the 60s now, love, you know, and we wear stuff like this and we have sex before marriage." And
Yeah.
so there is a sort of sexual awakening hint there as well, which is, it
I
doesn't.
suppose that sort of runs through the Hammer genre as well.
Yeah, because they used to sort of hint at it, didn't they? Like they used to have, like, say in Dracula, that the hint that she was going to lose her virginity
Yeah.
or something would be someone removing or undoing her shirt and showing
Yes.
her neck. Whereas actually it's a bit more explicit now. It's like, no, the couples share a bed and then they have sex, and you know, we can all get over the shock and horror of that. And I think Hammer have come bang up to date. You know, although this film's nearly 60 years old, it just feels like a quite fresh feminist.
It felt really
movie.
fresh after, you know, compared to the previous films that we've seen in Hammer. It was really nice to see them coming up to the modern day and
Yeah,
taking part in a more psychological thriller. And
yeah.
there's a really nice story that brings this whole thing and closes the circle on this because apparently, and I'm not sure how true this is, Tallulah Bankhead had to do some overdubbing at the end of filming of this.
Yeah.
And there was one line that she had left to do, and she would come into the dubbing studio and sat there with the sound engineer. And Tallulah Bankhead, I think, at the time was known for being, I guess, unreliable at best. And there is actually a Broadway play called Looped, which the subject of this play is Tallulah Bankhead coming into the studio to record this one final line for the film Fanatic.
Yeah.
And she's kind of there getting drunk and she's not able to say the line, and it just rumbles on, and she spends the best part of the day in the recording studio trying to get this line out and not being able to. So this was on Broadway, and so the line she's supposed to be recording is, "And so, Patricia, as I was telling you, that deluded rector has, in literal effect, closed the church to me."
Wow, that's a
And
line.
yeah, I mean, it's a difficult line, but she spent
She
the
had
whole
to loop that to
day,
match her lip movement as
yeah,
well.
basically getting drunk and trying to unsuccessfully loop that.
Do you know
So
what?
anyway,
Some of the looping, I could tell she was completely off her face when she did it because it doesn't match at all.
yeah, totally. So anyway, the actress who was originally slated to play in this stage production, Looped in Broadway, had to leave for medical reasons. And guess who took over from her to play the Tallulah Bankhead character in 2013?
I mean, I could guess, but it would be just way off. Can you want to tell me?
Stephanie Powers.
Do you know what? I was gonna say that. I thought, how old was Stephanie Powers 10 years ago? About 70. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, so Stephanie Powers plays Tallulah Bankhead in a Broadway stage production
I
about
love it.
Fanatic, which is just
that is
great.
brilliant. I absolutely love that. I
And it's a
actually,
play called Looped, and you can find the whole thing, actually not with Stephanie
oh,
Powers playing, but you can find it on YouTube.
I want to watch that very, very much. I was going to say, we mentioned Giallo, and I think we were talking about the colors that are used, and Arthur Ibbotson uses, and I think deliberately, there are some Giallo moments, because down in the basement, I meant to mention this, there's some stained glass windows, or colored glass, and so there are shots that go blue and green and red, and they when they're showing Tallulah Bankhead's character, and I think that was quite deliberately Giallo-esque, and it must be something to do with, it's either Arthur Ibbotson or Silvio Nazarino must have gone, let's do some Giallo type cinematography in this bit. It suddenly goes all multicolored, and it's almost like they've put a filter on the on the light suddenly, and I think it's a nice effect.
Well, it feels almost like, I don't know, like Mask of the Red Death as well, which I think was from a year previous as well. So a lot of those American sort of horror movies of the time as well.
Yeah, but I was really impressed with this movie. I think it's very memorable. Obviously we've had lots to say about it, so it's clearly inspired us.
I've had a ball. It's been a great fun, and I'm surprised that there's not more online about this film, because it is a great film. Obviously, there was The Nanny, same year, Betty Davis, and that's really gruesome as well, because she literally drowns a boy in a bathtub.
Yeah, maybe that one gets all the attention for that year, because I think someone I was talking to recently said it's either going to be one of two of our listeners and our friends, Andy or Stephen, said, I'm sure that Fanatic is their favorite. I know Dracula is Stephen's favorite movie, obviously. I think his book about Christopher Lee has just been nominated for an award as well, which is great.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, Stephen Mosley, Christopher Lee book, which is, I haven't read it yet.
I'm in the middle of it. It's great. Yeah,
nice.
I do encourage people to get that.
Oh, he's a fantastic writer, is Stephen. And Andy's got some stuff out as well. I think he's he writes horror essays, so he's got some essays out in magazines, and I think he might have one coming out soon in a DVD release. I should know, really. Speaking of DVD releases, which we were, I'm going to be very, very enigmatic about this, but the next episode of Hammerheads is about the film Plague of the Zombies from 1966. And we are hopefully going to be tying this in with a release of a film that I have co-directed about zombies. So when that film comes out on UK streaming and hopefully Blu-ray in the next, I think let's say March, April, an early estimate, we're going to hopefully tie in the release of the Plague of the Zombies episode with that, aren't we? And we'll have some special guests on, Hannah Bungard and Tony Hipwell, who are my co-writers, co-directors on the movie Zomblogalypse. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
I am massively looking forward to that. I have a list as long as your arm of questions to be asking you three. So it's going to be great to see you all. So
excellent. But look, it's been really fun. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I've enjoyed this one very much. And go watch Fanatic if you can, because hopefully we've bigged it up enough.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I'm really looking forward to next time. So join us then, and subscribe, like, and enjoy.
And spread the word, and we'll see you next time.